Part 65. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 641. Songji's imperial edict specified that Su Buling would bring 50,000 Ziliang troops to Guangzhou to assist the court in suppressing the rebellion. Strictly speaking, the Ziliang army also belonged to Songji. Su Buling was just a border general. After bringing the troops over, he had to go to Chang'an City to resume his duties. Then Songji arranged for a position and went to Luozhou. General Guan Hongyi, the commander of Xiangping rebels, reported, "When you enter the palace to meet the emperor, you certainly cannot bring an army of 50,000 with you." 50,000 Ziliang cavalry entered Chang'an City, and any idiot can imagine the effect, let alone entering Chang'an City. As long as they did not follow the route and had the intention of approaching Chang'an City, the Guangzhou army who was left behind would probably attack directly. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Su Buling had to travel lightly to Chang'an. As for safety, there is nothing to worry about. 50,000 Ziliang cavalry are placed outside the city. If Songji dares to attack Su Buling, the rebellion will not be put down. King Su and the four eastern kings join forces to fight both front and back, and they are probably dead. The first is Songji. After arriving in Chenkang in the morning, Yang Zunyi took the army and detoured from the north of the Wei River to Luozhou. Su Buling left the team and went to Chang'an City to enter the palace to meet the saint. It was a long journey back and forth, and after meeting the sage and receiving the order, he had to go back and join the army. It only took a few days, so Su Buling asked Nightingale and the others to wait in the Ziliang army. He only took a group of personal soldiers to Chang'an. Ning Qingyi and Manzi were iron sisters, and knowing that little Manzi must have gone crazy because she was riding a captured wind-chasing horse, which would not slow down her speed, she followed her back to the ship. After running continuously for a whole day, he ran nearly 200 miles. It was not until after 3 o'clock that Su Buling arrived near the Qinggui Tower as agreed in advance. Military advisor Yuzhulu was dressed in a civilian robe. He raised his hand at the fork in the road to stop the team, turned around and said, "In my humble position, I will go to the capital to take care of military affairs first. There will be a court meeting tomorrow morning. The young prince will just arrive in time." Su Buling finally found a chance to go home to accompany his wife. It was impossible for him to wait outside the imperial city now. He nodded and said, "I'm familiar with the roads. Mr. Yu doesn't have to worry about this. He can take the brothers to rest one night at the prince's mansion on Kuishao Street. It won't be too late to go and take over during the day." Yuzhulu was not as unruly as Lao Xiao, and was meticulous in his conduct. He nodded and rushed to Chang'an City with more than 100 soldiers. Ning Qingyi stood on the side of the road wearing light armor. After the horse team had gone away, she drove the white wind-chasing horse to Su Buling. After thinking about it, she suddenly said, "Su Buling, please take it easy at night. Don't doze off when you go to see the emperor tomorrow." The phrase "take it easy" naturally means that when Su Buling gets on the ship, don't visit MRS scene one by one. Ning Qingyi has been staying with Su Buling for nearly half a year. Even if she didn't deliberately inquire, she knew that Su Buling often visited at night. There were 4 women on the boat, and it would probably take half a night to get together. If she looked weak and unsteady when she saw the emperor tomorrow morning, that person would be in great trouble. Su Buling knew that Ning Qingyi was outspoken, so he was just giving a simple warning, but his words obviously meant to look down on his figure. He said with a smile, "Qingyi, are you worried that my body and bones are exhausted? Are you feeling distressed?" Ning Qingyi's tone remained calm when facing Qiao Huahua. "You have a strong physique, so you won't be exhausted. Why should I feel bad? But if you indulge too much, your energy and blood will inevitably become weak. You should take care of yourself." Perhaps because she felt that it was not appropriate to say this, Ning Qingyi stopped talking, lightly held the horse's belly and walked in front. Su Buling had been away for nearly a month, and he really missed her. He stopped flirting with Qing Ye, and walked quickly to the dock together. Under the emperor's feet in Chang'an City, even the towns outside the city were far more prosperous than Mobei. The lights on the Qinggui Tower are bright, which is very eye-catching in the night. The dock is full of merchant ships and boats. There are still ships docking late at night, and Lifu is unloading goods back and forth. The building boat parked in a secluded part of the pier had its lights turned off. Only the guards were walking back and forth on the deck, seemingly quiet. Su Buling and Ning Qingyi quickly came to the boat building. Seeing that the girls had already rested, they did not wake them up without making a big move. After handing the horses to the guards, they entered the boat building. Ning Qingyi was already very sleepy from the long journey, so she went directly to Zhu Manzi's house without chatting with Su Buring. In the room, the moonlight shines in through the window and shines on the bedside. Zhu Manzi made a big font and lay diagonally on the quilt. He was small and did not fall off the bed. However, with such a posture, the quilt obviously could not cover him properly, half of his body was exposed from the spring quilt. The edge of the belly band embroidered with mandarin ducks reveals a round and white arc. So big. Ning Qingyi frowned and looked down at her flat breastplate. She felt that she would care about this after spending all this time in the army waiting for demons. She walked forward, put the sword on the dressing table, raised her hand and untied the armor tether under her ribs. On the other side, after Su Buling entered the shipbuilding, he sent Qingyi back to the room, turned around and looked around, feeling a little hesitant. I have to rush to Chang'an City early tomorrow morning, and I definitely won't be able to lick them all tonight. Xiaoqi lives on the second floor, and she has a lot of work these days, so it would definitely not be good to disturb her rest at night. Aunt Lu prefers to hold him and talk, slowly warming up the atmosphere, but he is reluctant to make a quick decision, and will probably have to come back tomorrow to take care of him. Yafu is young and has only had sex a few times so far. She has not tasted the marrow yet, so she is not in a hurry. As for the baby, he must be crazy. Thinking of this, Su Buling turned around and walked to the innermost side of the corridor, stopped in front of the door at the stern of the ship, and listened. Two faint breathing sounds came from the noise of the water on the river, which was hard to hear clearly. But definitely two people. Su Buling's eyes lit up. The one who could sleep with the baby was either Kikai or Aunt Lu. What a coincidence. After staying in the Ziliang military camp for a month and a half, even though Jeju and Yuhi were with them, Shuchu and Qingyi stayed together. There were tens of thousands of soldiers around them, so there were very few opportunities to be sweet with each other. There was no need to think about it when the two of them were together. It had been a long time since he had been wild, and Su Buling felt a little restless. He gently opened the door and locked it gently. He untied his robe while walking and walked into the back room wearing only thin pants. Normally, Su Buling would definitely be able to hear the slight difference between the two breathing sounds, but at this time, he was so anxious, his heartbeat was racing and his breathing was erratic, so he wouldn't pay attention to these small details. Su Buring raised his hand and opened the curtain, and the outlines of two women were vaguely visible, lying back to back on the quilt, with the inner side facing the wall, leaving only the back of their heads. Xiao Xiang'er was lying on the pillow facing outwards, holding a small mahogany sign in her hand. She had pink cheeks, fragrant lips, and delicate and picturesque appearance. Her moving appearance was very close at hand. Su Buletinling's breathing became a little heavier, and he didn't bother to wake up. He opened the quilt and lay down in it, gnawing randomly. Woo! Xiao Xiang'er was so pressed that she couldn't breathe in her sleep that she woke up immediately. However, as an old couple, Su Buling's weight and technique had long been remembered in their bones. Before her mind was clear, her body's instinctive reaction had already begun. She gave up her struggle, raised her hands and hooked Su Buling's neck, and wrapped her legs around Su Buling's waist. Tear. The middle door of the red nightgown is wide open, and the two golden carps show a special luster. Su Buling moved quickly. While holding Xiang down, he also raised his hand to reach to the side. His hand grasped the soft ball very accurately. The feedback sent back made Su Buling's body stiffen suddenly. It's so soft, it just doesn't feel right. Yufu. Unlike, Yufu is smaller. Chiao Yi. After Xiao Xiang hooked Su Buling's neck, her eyes gradually sobered up, and her body shook violently. Then she wildly slapped Su Buling's shoulders with her hands, turned her head and removed her lips. Don't, hurry up, hurry up. His words were incoherent, his voice was anxious, and he didn't know what to say. Su Bulenling noticed something was wrong, so he retracted his hand as if he was electrocuted, and looked blankly at the back of his head. The woman was pinched hard. She seemed to be aware of it and woke up. She turned her head slightly and murmured with half-closed eyes. Queen Mother, what's wrong? The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 642. The moonlight was clear, and the building boats were rising and falling at the pier, and it was eerily quiet. Su Buling pressed Xiao Xiang her heart beating like a drum, and her eyes were stunned and a little confused. After meeting Kui Zioan, Su Buling really felt pity for this woman with a troubled life experience. Later, when he learned Kui Zioan's identity, he also had some sympathy. What Xiang was worried about was mother-in-law and daughter-in-law sleeping together. He swore that although he couldn't help but think about that scene, he never acted on it. But I really didn't expect that this achievement that I just thought about in my spare time would be achieved like this. In the dimly lit curtain room, Kui Zioan turned her head sleepily, and her childish voice sounded at the same time. Queen Mother, what's wrong? Xiao Xiang's slapping movements suddenly froze, and she quickly covered her mouth, but she felt that there was no point in hiding her ears and stealing the bell, so she tried to push Su Buling away, but Su Buling was a little sinking and pushed, and her apricot eyes were angry and anxious. Su Buling was also very frightened. He put aside the doubts, excitement, and confusion in his heart, quickly turned over and landed on the bedside, quickly lifted up his robe from the floor, and put it on the white robe in almost the blink of an eye. Body. Kui Zioan turned her head and vaguely saw a dark figure, which frightened her so much that she screamed softly and woke up instantly. Looking carefully, she saw Xiao Xiang looking at her with wide eyes, her face turning red and white, as if she wanted to explain but didn't know what to say. Outside the curtain, Su Buling, who was wearing a white robe, was standing next to the dressing table, with his back to the two of them. He could only see a rather handsome side face, and he was speaking slightly awkwardly. Miss Kui, why are you here? I was the one who was rude. I came in just now. Let's go out now. As he said that, he wanted to run away. When Kui Zioan saw Su Buling, her eyes brightened obviously and she raised her upper body slightly. Etc. Su Bulenling's steps froze, and he tied his belt quietly with one hand, speaking in a gentle voice. Why, is there anything else wrong with Miss Kui? Kui Zioan just woke up from a deep sleep, and her thoughts obviously didn't turn around so quickly. She frowned and thought about it, slightly confused. Just now, it seemed like someone pinched me. As he said that, he lowered his head and looked at the white clothes. Xiao Xiang's heart beat faster than Su Bulenling's. She knew that Su Bulenling must have taken advantage just now, but how could she dare to talk nonsense at this time, so she quickly explained. Xiao Wan, I pinched you. Su Bulenling suddenly ran back. I was also shocked, and I hit you harder. Oh. Kui Zioan felt that Xiao Xiang's tone was a bit wrong, but she didn't think too much about it. She turned over in bed and faced outside. I thought you wouldn't come back until tomorrow afternoon, and I was just talking to my mother about you. As he spoke, he looked at Xiao Xiang'er, but from the gap in the quilt, he found that Xiao Xiang'er's clothes were wide open under the quilt, and the lotus flowers and carp were pushed into the middle, revealing a big white ball. Kui Zioan was slightly startled, covered the quilt a little more tightly, and said doubtfully, "Mother, are you hot?" It was definitely not hot in March, but Xiao Xiang'er was sweating on his forehead. He carefully closed the clothes under the quilt and said with a smile, "It's a little hot. You can continue to sleep. I'll let him out." Su Buling also nodded, "Yes, go to bed early." Kui Zioan had no intention of letting Su Buling leave. She turned over and sat up, leaning forward to get the skirt outside the curtain. "This is your house. You and the queen are married. It's me who should leave. Please wait a moment." She wore close-fitting clothes when sleeping, revealing nothing, and with Su Buling's back turned, Kui Zioan's movements were not coy. The close-fitting clothes outline a figure like a weak willow, with extremely beautiful curves. The fabric of the thin pants is light and has a faint flesh color, like a polished jade ball, with a pink light that looks like frost and snow. Su Buling naturally couldn't help but look back. He saw Kui Zioan's movements in the bronze mirror and raised his hands slightly. "No need to get up, I'm going to sleep in another room." Xiao Xiang'er couldn't push Kui Zioan out, so he pulled her back with his hands and pressed her down under the quilt. "Yeah, you've already fallen asleep. It's troublesome to get up, so don't worry about him." Seeing this, Kui Zioan didn't insist. She pulled up the quilt and covered it under her neck. She lay on her side on the pillow and smiled softly. "Su Buletinling, you're not in a hurry to go to sleep, are you?" Su Buling was not very sleepy to begin with, but his fright had already disappeared. Seeing that Kui Zioan had something to say, he did not leave in a hurry. Instead, he came to sit down at the round table outside and poured himself a cup of tea. Shock. "I'm not in a hurry. I just wanted to ask you why you came here." Kui Zioan was about to explain this when she heard the words and said softly, "You told me a story last time, and you were about to go out to fight in the middle of the story. I wanted to go find the girl Jeju you mentioned, but I found that you took everyone away. I kept thinking about that story in the Sea of Flowers, and fell asleep without sleep. I asked Lao Jie to send me here. If you don't think it's appropriate, I'll just go back." Su Buling suddenly understood, nodded, and said, "I didn't make it clear last time. Well, now that I've come here, it's good to live here, but Jeju is fighting with me outside, and neither of us can stay here every day." Kui Zioan blinked her eyes. "It doesn't matter, the queen also knows that I heard the same story from the queen." "But why are the stories you told the queen different from the ones you told me?" Su Buletinling's expression froze. Xiao Xiang'er's eyes were full of embarrassment, but she didn't want to show off, so she could only glare at Su Buling. "He and I are husband and wife. Those things were all added by him privately, so you don't need to take them to heart." Kui Zioan nodded, looked at Su Buling's back, remained silent for a while, and then said, "You are going to Chang'an City tomorrow, right?" "Yes, I have to go and see the Holy One." Hearing the emperor, Kui Zioan's eyes were a little strange, and she looked at her mother and herself. "Then you have to be careful. Songji looks kind and generous, but he is actually very petty. He can kill even his brothers. If he knew that my mother and I were sleeping in your room, I would have to push you out, Ling Qi." Su Buling almost choked on his tea. Xiao Xiang'er's face turned red and she quickly pulled. "Zioan, don't talk nonsense." Kui Zioan's expression was very serious. "I'm not talking nonsense. Although he and I are innocent, that's how it seems to outsiders. The queen and the queen mother slept on the prince's bed at night and told the emperor that they were chatting. The queen mother thought that the emperor would believe it. Well. Xiao Xiang'er was speechless. Su Buring didn't know what to say, so he smiled and said, "Well, Miss Kui, don't worry, there are all the royal family's confidants on board, and there won't be any leaks." Kui Zioan nodded, looked in the direction of Chang'an City, and said, "By the way, I have a dead man named Jia Yi, who was very loyal to me. Old Jia said that in order to avenge me, he became Song Yu's chess piece. He died and was buried in the Queen's mausoleum. I want to go and pay a visit. But this is your ship. It's not good for me to run around on my own, so I didn't ask Lao Jia to take me there. I have to ask what you want first." Su Buling was naturally aware of this matter. In order to make him believe that the locking dragon goo was given by the emperor, Jia Yi risked his life to spread the panic. The dead man was already prepared to give up everything for his master. Jia Yi sacrificed his life to avenge Kui Zioan. He killed people to break the situation. There was nothing wrong with each other, and there was no hatred or burden in his heart. He said softly, "I will come back from entering the palace tomorrow, and will set off to join the Ziliang army the day after tomorrow. I will check the situation in the afternoon. If possible, I will take you there." Kui Zioan smiled, "Thank you. It's getting late. You can go and rest." Su Buling was too embarrassed to stay in the boudoir. After getting up and saying goodbye to Xiao Xiang, he went out of the room. The footsteps faded away, and the boudoir became quiet again. Xiao Xiang was lying upright on the quilt. Although she felt a little empty and wanted to be hummed hard by her stinky brother, she was definitely too embarrassed to get up and go out at this moment. Kui Zioan was lying next to her, continuing to sleep without closing her eyes. After a long silence, she suddenly took hold of Xiao Xiang's wrist, pulled it down and placed it on her lapel, and pressed it with her hand. Xiao Xiang was stunned for a moment, then gently pulled back her hand, with a slightly strange look in her almond-shaped eyes. "Zioan, what are you?" Kui Zioan blushed slightly for probably the first time since she was a child. Fortunately, the night was dark and the light was dim, so she couldn't see clearly even if she was close at hand. She pinched it with her hands, frowned and said, "Mother, you just pinched me, right? Your hand is small, you can only hold half of it, but you held most of it." Although I was in a daze, I still remember this. Xiao Xiang's pretty face froze, her heart racing, but she didn't know how to explain Su Buling's frivolous behavior. Kui Zioan took back her hand, lay down again, and closed her eyes. He must have admitted the wrong person. "Don't worry about the unintentional mistake. It's okay." Xiao Xiang nodded quickly, "That's right, that's good. However, his hands are so heavy. Wouldn't it hurt you, Queen Mother, if he pinched someone like that?" Xiao Xiang's face gradually turned red, and she held it in for a long time. "It's not bad. It's weird not to talk about this anymore. Mother, you don't need to be so formal. The harmony of yin and yang is just like the pollination of flowers. It is the law of all things. As long as it is justified and reasonable, there is nothing shameful." "Haha, that's what I said, forget it, go to sleep." "Oh. Thank you Tingmi and QVQ for the second leader's reward. Thank you the meat is so delicious boss for the 10,000 reward. Thank you to Yun Biao Yao boss for the 10,000 reward. Entered the Hall of Masters, thank you guys for your support or two. Feel free to show your love to the Queen Mother's baby. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 643. Boom. 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 The morning bell rang throughout Chang'an, and among the 108 squares, the 3 religions and 9 streams, ordinary people in the market, princes, princes and ministers all moved with the sound and rushed on their own roads. The palace gates opened one after another, and the civil and military officials walked through the white stone royal road and entered the most central palace in the world. On the dragon chair in the middle of the Tai Chi hall, Songji, dressed in a dragon robe, sat upright, looking at the central axis of Chang'an, all the way to the end of Zuk Street. Outside Chongming Gate, the dragon flag is fluttering. Under the gloomy weather, armored sergeants stood outside the city gate, and people from all over the world filed in. Among the crowd, a black horse, familiar but unfamiliar to the people of Chang'an, walked through the city gate in an orderly manner. On horseback, there was a handsome man in a white robe with a stern face and an unsmiling look, just like he had when he entered and exited the city gate many times in previous years. His cold and indifferent aura silenced the surrounding soldiers and wolf guards. Among the crowds inside and outside the city gate, there were also nobles from high families who had seen Su Buling. After discovering this very eye-catching prince, their eyes were filled with surprise. They either pulled their friends to stop and watch, or raised their hands to salute and say hello. Su Buletinling walked onto Zuk Street unhurriedly as if he hadn't seen him before. In this Chongming Gate, Su Buling was lying down when he first came in, and he was lying down when he went out last time. But this time, he obviously didn't have to lie down anymore. On the 1,000-foot-long street, Su Buling looked at the imperial city and Taiji Palace at the end of his field of vision, his eyes cold. I didn't expect that I would come back again. His Royal Highness. Before Su Buling finished uttering the harsh words, a hoarse shout suddenly came from beside him, with excitement and a trembling voice, like a beggar who had been wandering for many years and met his long-lost biological father. Ning Qingyi and Zhu Manzi, who were secretly following the crowd behind, were shocked when they heard the sound. If the other party hadn't been too old, they would have thought that Su Buling had an illegitimate child in Chang'an. Su Buling stopped talking, frowned, and turned around, only to see a middle-aged man wearing a military attache's robe next to the city gate. He had an upright figure and a solemn face. He raised his hands and cupped his fists and bowed in a distant manner. Look at these impeccable movements. If you hadn't practiced in front of the mirror for more than 10 years, you wouldn't be as good at it. The middle-aged man's arms were trembling slightly, which showed how excited he was, and he said in a trembling voice. Humble position Gongsun Ming. When I learned that His Highness the Crown Prince was seriously injured and would not recover, I was heartbroken every night and had trouble sleeping and eating every day. Fortunately, the sky has eyes. Every sentence was sonorous, powerful, and touching, and the soldiers standing guard next to him were stunned. But before Gongsun Ming finished his speech, his son Gongsun Lu next to him pulled his father's sleeve. Dad, let's go, stop yelling. Gongsun Ming paused for a moment and then looked up, only to see His Royal Highness riding a big horse, already more than 10 steps away, without even bothering to look back. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Gongsun Ming straightened up quickly, trotted behind the wind-chasing horse, and said with a kind smile. In my humble position, I can't help myself for a moment. Don't blame me, Your Highness. Su Buling rolled his eyes, remembering the scene when Gongsun Ming and Song Yufo took turns to praise him, and wanted to give this guy a kick. However, the matter has long since passed, and he was not interested in using his fists against a young official. He just said calmly. Master Gongsun, are you still alive? Gongsun Ming was shocked when he heard this and shed tears of gratitude. The prince, despite his busy schedule, still cares about the safety of his humble position. He is really flattered. Su Buling raised his hand to hold the hilt of the sword at his waist and glanced sideways at Gongsun Ming. Sensing the danger, Gongsun Ming quickly shut up and started talking about business. The Holy One has ordered me to come all the way to greet His Highness the Crown Prince. The courtiers are already waiting at the Taiji Palace. I also asked the Crown Prince to follow me to the imperial city. Only then was Su Buling satisfied. He raised his chin, signaled Gong Sun-ming to open the way, and asked softly, "Have there been any changes in the capital in the past year?" Gong Sun-ming asked the imperial guards to clear the way in front, while he trotted beside the horse chasing the wind and said diligently, "Big changes have taken place. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince has left, and all the young ladies in the city are falling in love with each other. Lord Gong Sun, do you want me to hand over a message to the Holy One later and give you a promotion? Tomorrow I will take my family and go to Lingnan to be the magistrate of the state." Gong Sun-ming's expression was shocked. "Your Majesty, you don't have to worry about your humble position." "Well, there haven't been any big changes in the past year. The 3 princes and 9 ministers have been replaced by Lord Guan Hongzhou from the Guan family on Kuishao Street, and his younger brother General Guan Hongyi is the commander-in-chief of the prince's counter-rebellion. General Guan Hongyi's ability to lead troops is naturally inferior to His Highness Prince Su. Although his son, Lord Guan, is handsome and good at both civil and military affairs, he has unique hobbies and is said to be unisex. Compared with His Royal Highness, eating is nothing like clouds and mud." Su Buling waved his hand. "Don't mention these things. Is Song Ying back?" Gong Sun-ming shook his head. "Lord Song, the divine dragon has seen its head but not its tail. How can a humble official know its whereabouts? However, recently the lieutenant's mansion has been ordered to strictly investigate outsiders entering the city. It seems that the detective department has received news that someone wants to rescue the Prince of Northern Qi. John Kai is imprisoned in the dungeon of the Criminal Investigation Department. If the news is true, Master Song may also be guarding Chang'an City." Su Buring nodded. "He just came to report that he was here. He would leave the city as soon as the court meeting was over. He didn't have time to invite Song Ying to tea. He didn't ask questions at the moment. He drove his horse through Zuk Street and arrived outside the imperial city. He crossed directly, entering the palace gate. At the end of the white stone royal road, the majestic hall stands under the sky. The rain is about to come, and the gloomy weather adds a bit of solemnity. In the Taiji Hall, Song Ji sat on the dragon chair, with civil and military officials on his left and right. The Grand Commandant Guan Hongzhou told the latest situation in various places in Daewoo. From New Year's Eve to today, in 3 months, the landslide situation has almost overwhelmed the civil and military officials. The verbal battles that often occurred in the court have disappeared, leaving only the frowns in the hall. At the beginning, Song Ji would lose his temper and scold the officials, but now he has calmed down. He is just like an old chess player, taking the remaining chess in front of him seriously, and taking every step carefully in the midst of murderous intentions. The attitudes of the court officials in the hall have also changed slightly compared to before. In the past, Song Ji's prestige was unquestionable. He managed Daewoo in an orderly manner, and the vassal kings obeyed his orders without daring to have any dissent. The court was in awe and obedience from the bottom of their hearts. Now, Daewoo is on fire everywhere, and there are chaos in the east, south, west and north. The cause of these problems may have been there since the founding of the country, and it has little to do with Song Ji, but the reason for the fire is that Song Ji is too strong in power, which has angered the vassal kings. After the flames were raised, they could not be extinguished, and they burned more and more. The court officials could not clean up the mess, so they naturally became dissatisfied with Song Ji. However, the current situation has not yet reached the point where it is powerless to save the situation. Although the court officials have some opinions in their hearts, they are not easy to show them, and they are still trying to remedy it seriously. After Guan Hongzhou finished telling the battle situation at the border, he returned to his original position and discussed countermeasures with the court officials. From the corner of his eyes, he occasionally looked outside the Taiji Hall, waiting for the arrival of Prince Su. Soon, the sound of crisp horse hooves rang out on the white stone square outside the hall, and a eunuch came in to report. Song Ji smiled a little and raised his hand gently. Announce Su Buling to enter the hall. Announce, Prince Su to enter the hall. The loud voice came out of the hall, and all the civil and military officials stopped talking and looked out of the hall. Outside the Taiji Hall, under the white stone steps, a tall man in a white robe, with his hand on the hilt of the sword, walked up the steps slowly. Not hurried or slow, gradually revealing an extraordinary handsome face, with a calm expression, without any emotion, no different from the past. The last time most of the court officials met Su Buling was at the Falling Bend, when Su Buling rushed to the Wangjiang terrace alone with a sword and stabbed Song Ji to death. At that time, everyone thought that Su Buling was dead, and if he was alive, he would be a useless person imprisoned to death. Now seeing Su Buling entering the Taiji Hall intact, although his face is still the same as before, it is difficult for the court officials to regard this young man of only 20 as an immature son of a noble family. The court officials reviewed the usurpation of the throne by Song Yu and the mystery of the dragon locking Gu last year. Song Yu and Taiwei Lu Pingyang lost everything, and the emperor and Prince Su were both injured. One failed to reduce the vassal state and caused the current turmoil, and the other's only son became a madman. But as time went by, Su Buling found a good prescription and recovered as soon as he returned to Suzhou. The court officials understood that the only winner of the turmoil that caused bloodshed in Chang'an last year was Su Buling. And he won thoroughly, just like now, when Su Buling entered the Taiji Hall alone and came to Song Ji could only grit his teeth and swallow his anger, putting on a friendly smile. At this time of war, the civil and military officials in the court naturally did not dare to mention the unpleasant things of last year. When they met, they began to praise Su Buling's feat in Taiyuan and recalled the glory of General Su in those days. Su Buling ignored the civil and military officials in the court. He put his hand on the hilt of the sword and looked straight ahead. He strode through the center of the Taiji Hall and came to the bottom of the dragon throne. He raised his hand and saluted. "Your Majesty, I am Su Buling, and I pay my respects to His Majesty." Song Ji's face was gentle, and there was no other emotion in his eyes. He just raised his hand gently. "No need for courtesy. The ministers are discussing the war in Taiyuan. You have just arrived. You can listen first. If you have a good plan, you can speak freely." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Su Buling nodded gently and stood behind his brother-in-law Xiao Chuiang. The two sides met again, and they had just two short conversations without any emotions, as if nothing had happened before, just a normal monarch and minister. The civil and military officials were not surprised by this. After a brief greeting, they began to analyze the Taiyuan War again. However, the calmer the surface, the more violent the suppressed things in the heart. No one knew what Song Ji was thinking while sitting on the dragon throne. Su Buling, standing behind the three officials, looked at the emperor in the same hall with his peripheral vision. Even if he didn't want to be so mean, some messy thoughts flashed through his mind. Your mother is so obedient. Your wife is so soft. One hand can't hold it. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 644. Swish swish. The heavy rain fell on the bluestone alleys. Another year has passed in the blink of an eye, and the old wine shop in the alley is still the same as before, with 3 wine tables, several wine vats, and yellow wine flags swaying in the wind and rain. 1 year is a short time, and shopkeeper's son is still the same as before, walking around the small wine shop alone with a towel on his shoulders. A year is also a long time. Most of the drinkers who often came to sit here last year have gone their separate ways and replaced themselves with new faces. Shopkeeper, bring me a jug of wine. In the lingering spring rain, a voice with a hint of laughter sounded from outside the wine shop. Zhu Manzi was carrying an oil paper umbrella, a white top embroidered with flower petals, and a warm red skirt underneath. Her hair was combed into a bun that is common for ordinary girls, and she stood in front of the fence of the wine shop with a smile. Ning Qingyi wore a long skirt and held a snow-white sword in her hand. She looked sideways at the wine flags on the shed, looking slightly absent-minded. Old Palm Sun raised his eyes, looked at the two girls standing outside, and smiled slightly. "Hey 11K, little old man, I thought you two wouldn't come back. Little Zhu, have you found your father?" Zhu Manzi nodded with a smile, "I found it a long time ago. Do you remember this from the shopkeeper?" Shopkeeper's son wiped his hands with a towel and walked to the wine tank. "I remember, just find it." "Miss Yaoning, how are you doing?" Ning Qingyi knew that shopkeeper's son had taken care of Li Hanzhong back then and knew her life clearly. He hesitated for a moment, shook his head and said, "I have nothing to do with him. I didn't go looking for him." Shopkeeper's son thought about it for a moment and said softly, "Han Sheng, that kid, is not bad-hearted, but he is a bit of a picker. You two have similar temperaments." Ning Qingyi didn't really want to talk about Li Hanzhong, but having known Manzi for so long, he wasn't as unreasonable as before, so he just nodded slightly and said nothing. Seeing that Ning Qingyi was in a bad mood, Zhu Manzi interrupted with a smile. "Shopkeeper's son, don't keep talking about us. Your son should have a family, right? Have you got any grandchildren?" Shopkeeper's son had a smile on his face when he heard this. "I got married a long time ago. I work as a county magistrate outside. I haven't come back for several years. I really haven't hugged my grandson a few times." While talking, shopkeeper's son picked up the wine spoon and prepared to fill the wine pot with wine. Seeing this, Zhu Manzi quickly raised his hand. "I want a jar of wine, not a jar. We have to leave later. I can't tell if I can come over in the future. Buy more." Shopkeeper's son saw too many drinkers who wanted to buy more before leaving, so he shook his head and laughed. "The old rule is, one person, one pot, nothing can be shaken. Old Sidhu came here and said nothing good. No matter how much duaniasheo I bought, it was still not enough to drink for a few days. I really miss it. It's better to come back and sit around sometime. It's better than bringing a jar of wine. It works." Zhu Manzi knew the rules of Sun's shop, but she followed Su Buling out and agreed to buy wine for her lover. If she just bought one pot, it would definitely not be enough. She bargained. "Shopkeeper's son, we are old acquaintances." "Little old man, I have old acquaintances everywhere. If you buy it like this, what will the people behind drink? One pot per person, no negotiation." Zhu Manzi sighed, rolled his eyes, and pointed at Ning Qingyi's belly. "One pot per person is fine. Xiao Ning is pregnant. There are 3 of us, maybe 4, maybe 5. Ning Qingyi was in a daze. After hearing this, she came to her senses and raised her hand to pinch the waist of the branch. "What nonsense are you talking about? You just got pregnant." Shopkeeper's son didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was so beaten that he couldn't help it. He still filled 3 bottles of wine and handed it to Zhu Manzi. "Why didn't your brother come over? I heard that he has also come to the capital. I really miss him after not seeing him for a long time." Zhu Manzi took the 3 bottles of wine and held it in his hand, and said with a smile, "He is attending court in the palace, and he should come over later. Take care, shopkeeper, let's go hang out in front, let's go first." Shopkeeper's son nodded and watched the 2 of them disappear into the rain. Returning to Chang'an City will naturally bring back various memories of the past. Zhu Manzi carried 3 jars of wine and walked around the room, talking about using Ning Qingyi as free labor. Ning Qingyi held an umbrella for Manzi and walked towards the small courtyard where she once lived. Her eyes kept lingering around the alley, obviously recalling the time when she and Su Buling met here. When the 2 of them walked out of the alley, 2 passers-by came towards them. In front of the middle-aged man is a middle-aged man, wearing a formal robe with an easygoing face, holding a black oil paper umbrella in his hand. He looks like a Confucian scholar. Behind the middle-aged man is a girl with braids, about 12 years old, carrying a small peach blossom umbrella. Followed the man obediently. The four people passed by each other without stopping. Ning Qingyi came back to her senses after walking by. She felt vaguely familiar. She looked back, but could only see the top of the peach blossom umbrella and the hem of the little girl's skirt. Zhu Manzi looked a little confused, tilted his head and said, "Xiaoning, what's wrong?" "Nothing." Ning Qingyi felt that the little girl looked familiar, but she couldn't tell what was familiar. She thought about it carefully to no avail, so she just thought that she had met him by chance while walking around Chang'an City. "Shopkeeper, bring me a bottle of wine." The spring rain was pouring, and the 3 wine tables in the wine shop were all empty. Shopkeeper's son was wiping them in front of the wine vat. Outside the wine shop, the middle-aged man put away his oil paper umbrella and leaned against the fence at the door. Rainwater was still dripping from the tip of the umbrella. The girl with braided hair also put away the smaller peach blossom umbrella and leaned next to the black umbrella. Shopkeeper's son raised his head and looked around for a few times. He didn't recognize him, so he stepped forward with a smile and said, "Is this your first time in Chang'an? You look unfamiliar." The middle-aged man smiled warmly and sat down at the wine table by the window, letting the girl with pigtails sit opposite him. "In the past, I often heard that it is as fierce as fire, can destroy gold and jade, so it is called broken jade shao, which is the best wine in the world. I have heard it for half a lifetime, but I have never drunk it once. This time I happened to be in Chang'an, so I came to sit down." Shopkeeper's son chuckled, brought the warmed broken jade shao to the table, and took 2 dishes and put them down. "It's not a good wine, it's just strong. Please taste it and see if you are used to it." The middle-aged man took a sip of broken jade shao. Maybe he was used to kumis, and when he met this distilled wine, he was very happy. The strong liquor she drank was choked by the drink and she nodded. "It's as good as it is said." The girl with pigtails sat on the bench opposite. She had grown taller and her legs were no longer dangling in the air. She turned her head to look at shopkeeper's son and said with a smile, "Old man, my father really likes the wine you brew. When he was traveling around with my father, he always talked about this and said that everything he drank was tasteless." "Really?" Shopkeeper's son wiped his hands with a towel, sat down next to him, and looked at the girl. "What's your father's name? I have a good memory, maybe I know him." The girl with pigtails blinked and looked at the master opposite, obviously asking if she could tell him. The middle-aged man put down the wine bowl and said calmly, "My name is Shui Yi, a distant relative of the Shui family of Jiangnan Liuhuman. I came to Chang'an 2 years ago and had a problem. I heard that I ended up here. Do you remember me, old shopkeeper?" When shopkeeper's son heard this, he looked at the little girl with pigtails next to him, was silent for a moment, and sighed softly. "Old man, I thought I would have to wait for many years, but I didn't expect you to come so soon." Xiao Dehua was stunned. She looked slightly happy. "Old man, do you know my father?" "Yes, your father and your uncle Wu often come here to drink when they come to Chang'an." Shopkeeper's son stood up and walked into the back room. After a while, he came out with a long cloth bag and put it on the wine table. "Unfortunately, your father had a problem when he came to Chang'an last time, so he ran here late at night and left something for you." Xiao Dehua raised her hand to open the cloth bag, and 2 pieces of cold iron gun body appeared in front of her. A small peach flower was engraved on the gun barrel, crooked, but familiar. "Daddy." Little Dehua's eyes suddenly turned red, and she pursed her lips. She was about to cry, but she forced herself to hold it back. She held the 2 pieces of iron spears in her arms and looked at manager's son. "Did my daddy say anything?" "He said he would be back soon, but he never came back after he left." Manager's son has been selling wine in the wine shop all his life. He has never left for a day, but he has seen all the joys and sorrows in the world. He glanced at Zhou Qingkaiu and sighed. Traveling in the martial arts world, it is common to be separated from your wife and children, and dying on the street is a good end. How many people can really complete this? Your father regretted it at the time, but it was a worthy death for wandering in the martial arts world to die under the swords. Your father asked me to tell you, don't think about revenge for him, there is no revenge to be taken, live a good life in the future, don't go out to wander the martial arts world like him, it's not worth it. Xiao Dehua held the iron spear, her watery eyes were a little dazed, she stammered, but didn't know what to say. Zhou Qingkaiu took a sip from the wine bowl, and a smile appeared on his face. The old shopkeeper is a wise man. If everyone thought clearly like the old shopkeeper, there would not be so many separations of life and death in the world. Unfortunately, there are only a few people in the world who can see through these things. Without personal experience, ordinary people can't understand them at all. It's too early for the old shopkeeper to tell her about these things. The old shopkeeper's son showed some surprise in his eyes, and laughed, since the guest has such vision, there is no need for me to worry about it. This is my personality. I want to say a few words to people when I see them. It has become a habit. Please don't blame me, guest. Zhou Qingkaiu nodded slightly, chatted with shopkeeper's son for a few more words, drank a bowl of wine, and then got up and left the wine shop with Xiao Dehua. Xiao Dehua was holding the iron spear, feeling very depressed. She followed him out the door and raised her hand to take the small umbrella leaning against the wall. In a blink of an eye, she saw a man in white holding an oil paper umbrella and walking slowly towards her on a black horse at the entrance of the bluestone alley in the distance. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 645. After coming out of the Taiji Hall, it was already noon, and a light rain was falling in Chang'an City. Su Buling walked out of the palace gate and asked Yu Juelu, who was waiting outside, to contact Guan Hongyi. He led the horse to Daifang alone. To come to the Taiji Hall to see the emperor was just a formality. No matter how many ideas Songji had in his mind, he could not say anything to him. No matter how dissatisfied he was with Songji, he would not turn against Songji at this time. They only talked about official business at the court meeting, and did not say a word more than that. As for the 50,000 Ziliang troops, Xiao Qi had already expected how Songji would arrange them. Songji only wanted soldiers but not generals, and he could not kick the Su family away, so he let Su Buling, who had not yet taken power, lead the troops. The official position given was a nominal position without real power, and the meaning behind his words was that he had to listen to Guan Hongyi's arrangements and could not use troops without authorization without the control of the court. Su Buling did not say anything about this. After all, if he took sole control of the military power and integrated the 200,000 soldiers and militiamen in Guangzhou, he would not have to suppress the rebellion. He could just go back and make a living in Chang'an with the king of Su in the northwest, and ascend the throne directly with 400,000 troops. However, handing over the Ziliang army to Guan Hongyi for command is definitely not a long-term solution. The right to speak is gained through fighting. Su Buling still has to find a way to establish his prestige and suppress Guan Hongyi on the battlefield of suppressing the rebellion, and then he can confront the court for military power. It is not realistic to think of monopolizing power without fighting a battle. Riding a horse to the Zhuangyuan street in Daifang, Su Buling first went to Xianzizai and picked a few rouges for each girl on the boat, and then came to the Sun family shop, thinking of making a pot of duanyashao to save the wine bug in his stomach that was almost starving to death. In the bluestone alley, fine raindrops slid down from the umbrella ribs and fell on the bluestone floor tiles, and the horseshoes made a crisp ta-ta sound. After being in this world for so long, Su Buling has walked the most roads. Apart from Baobao's water and land roads, This alley is probably the one he has walked the most. A familiar scene came into view, and occasionally he could meet familiar drinkers. In fact, if there was really a chance, Su Buling would rather stay here, where he could live in peace and stability. Who would want to work hard outside? Seeing the old wine shop deep in the alley from afar, Su Buling smiled a little. He was thinking about how to greet manager Sun, when he suddenly saw a little girl running out of the wine shop, leaning over to pick up a small umbrella and looking over here. The four looked at each other. They had only met by chance, and the time was far apart, but they had not forgotten each other. Xiao Dehua. Big brother. Outside the wine shop, Xiao Dehua's sadness turned into surprise in an instant. She didn't even take the umbrella. She held the package in one hand and covered her head with the other hand, and ran quickly to the entrance of the alley. Zhou Qingkai held an oil paper umbrella, turned around, and saw the eye-catching horse chasing the wind. His eyes barely noticed, and he turned around and followed Xiao Dehua, with a steady pace, and the oil paper umbrella covered Xiao Dehua's head, so that no water could leak out. Su Buling loosened the reins, held the umbrella and walked forward quickly. Seeing this scene, he was a little surprised. He paid more attention to the middle-aged man holding the umbrella, and then looked at the girl with pigtails. Xiao Dehua, are you still in Chang'an City? Xiao Dehua stepped on embroidered shoes, ran through the bluestone alley, came to Su Buling, and smiled with curved eyebrows. I just came here a few days ago. I used to run around outside. Last time, I received money from my elder brother, saying that I asked Uncle Wu to tell your fortune, but, the result was. Xiao Dehua looked at the long package in her arms, and her eyes dimmed again. Su Buling's eyes moved down, and he saw the half-exposed gun barrel, and frowned slightly. There are very few people in the martial arts world who use iron as the barrel of a gun. On the night he met Xiao Dehua, he was plotted against by the Li family of Kuishao Street in Renai Hall. At that time, there was a man with an iron gun. After a little association, Su Buling pieced together the cause and effect, and understood why Xiao Dehua was gone when he went to look for her the next day. However, that night, the Li family bribed a master to ambush and kill him. Although he had a conflict with several people present, Shuiyi and Wu Yu, the iron gun, killed him with their high martial arts skills. The subsequent events were handled by the Wolf Guards, and according to the rules of the martial arts world, it had nothing to do with him. However, Su Buling felt a little sorry when he saw the sad-looking little girl in front of him. He walked a little closer and smiled. It's okay. We meet again now. This is. Su Buling looked at Zhou Qingkai. Zhou Qingkai had a casual expression and nodded slightly. I am Xiao Dehua's master. It is inconvenient to reveal my identity when traveling in the world. I hope you don't mind. Su Buling nodded slightly and didn't mind it. Hello, sir. Zhou Qingkai came this time for the son of the right prince. If he fought alone, he might not be able to defeat Su Buling. As long as they fought, their identities would be exposed. Naturally, he had no intention of fighting Su Buling here. He glanced at Xiao Dehua, then turned and walked towards the wine shop. You guys chat, I'll go over there and take a look. Xiao Dehua's slightly sad mood quickly recovered. Seeing that her master had walked away, she ran to stand under Su Buling's umbrella, took out the purse from her waist, took out the silver ingot that had always been attached to it, and handed it to Su Buling. Big brother, the silver you paid at that time. Uncle said that people in the martial arts world should be trustworthy and not take things that are not their own. I originally wanted to wait until I grew up and traveled around the martial arts world to find you, but I didn't expect to meet you so soon. The silver ingot lying in the palm of his hand was shiny, and it was obvious that he often held it in his hand and rubbed it. Su Buling's heart was slightly tightened, and after thinking about it, he raised his hand to close Xiao Dehua's fingers and held the silver ingot. Didn't you tell my fortune? It was very accurate. I should thank you. How can you take the silver back? Little Dehua shook her head. What I was telling you was nonsense. Even if it was accurate, it was still a lie. I can't take Big Brother's money in vain. Su Buring smiled softly. Fortune-telling is all a matter of luck. As long as the fortune-telling is correct, it will be accurate. I asked you to tell your fortune. If you get the money back if the fortune-telling is accurate, wouldn't it be a violation of the rules and you will be unlucky in the future? Xiao Dehua blinked her eyes and felt that it made sense. She was in a dilemma for a moment. Then you can't give so much. Anything more can be treated as an advance payment. When the little Dehua grows up and travels around the world, come to me with a silver ingot. With the extra money, you can just run some errands for me. People in the world accept money. Everything is done as a matter of course and no one owes you any favors. Xiao Dehua felt that this proposal was very suitable. She followed her master to practice martial arts seriously. She only thought about returning the ingot in the world and what she would do after returning it. She had not thought about it. Anyway, if you meet someone now and return them when you grow up, it doesn't seem impossible, but... Little Dehua thought for a while, then lowered her head and said, the old uncle in the wine shop said that when my father left, he told me not to go into the world in the future. My master often told me that the world is very small and there is nothing easy to do. When Su Buling heard this, he was stunned for a moment. He supported his knees with his palms, leaned forward slightly, and said with a smile. It's best if you don't go into the world. The world is really not interesting. But you are a girl. If you don't travel around the world to practice martial arts, what will you do in the future? Xiao Dehua recalled it for a moment and smiled. Master said that we want to bring peace to the world. I don't know what it means. To bring peace to the world? Su Buling blinked and raised his eyes to look at the middle-aged man standing in front of the wine shop with his hands behind his back. There was only one figure behind him. Master. Su Buling originally wanted to ask Xiao Dehua who his master was, but since he was traveling anonymously, it was against the rules to inquire wantonly. After thinking about it, he still didn't say anything. He raised his hand and rubbed Xiao Dehua's hair. Study hard with your master. When you have the skills in the future, we can bring peace to the world together. Little Dehua nodded, put away the ingot, looked back at the waiting master, and said softly, Master still has something to do, I'll leave first. How can I find Big Brother in the future? Su Buring chuckled lightly, Brother, I am the best in the world. You will know it when you grow up. You are still young now, so you don't have to think about it. Oh. Xiao Dehua pursed her lips and smiled, turned around and walked quickly through the rain curtain, running towards Zhou Qingkaiu. After running a few steps, she turned back and waved. Goodbye Big Brother. Su Buling raised his hand and waved, standing in the rain curtain, watching Xiao Dehua leave. Xiao Dehua followed Zhou Qingkaiu, turning back 3 times every step until the figure disappeared at the corner of the alley. Old shopkeeper's son stood behind the fence of the wine shop, looked around and sighed. That's how the world is. No one can tell the difference between good and bad. The young master is not a member of the world, and the little girl probably isn't either. As it is now, there's nothing wrong with it. Su Buling knew that shopkeeper's son was talking about Iron Gun Shui Yi. Although this matter had little to do with him, it was involved in Shui Yi's death. If Xiao Dehua knew the inside story in the future, would she cause trouble for him? I really can't say for sure. Su Buling led the big black horse to the outside of the wine shop and handed out the wine gourd. Yeah, I hope. Sir, are you still following the old rules? Old rules. Shopkeeper's son took the wine gourd, picked up the wine spoon, and poured the clear wine into the gourd, making a gurgling sound. Su Buletinling kept his eyes on the corner of the alley, maybe his mind was no longer on the wine. After taking the wine gourd, he put down a piece of silver, led the horse and turned around to leave. Shopkeeper's son wiped his hands with a towel, stood under the eaves of the small wine shop, looked at Su Buling's leaving figure, then looked at the other end of the alley, shook his head and smiled. In the bluestone alleys, people come and go day after day, year after year, and everyone may have such a unique story. Some have just begun, some have ended long ago, and some are still stuck in it. No one can tell clearly how many entanglements of love and hate, joys and sorrows there are in the obsession. I am afraid that the only person who can know everything is wine that can make people forget everything. The bosses would like to compare their feelings with the Queen Mother's baby. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 646. After coming out of Sun's shop, I walked among the neighbors for a long time and came to the house I bought that year. The thin spring rain also became a little lighter. Su Buling stopped his horse at the entrance of the courtyard, pushed the door open and entered the familiar courtyard. The apricot trees on the wall are lush and green. It has been uninhabited for half a year. The yard is covered with fallen leaves. The small windows and a few crooked wooden boards in the main house are still the same as before. Ning Qingyi, in a white dress like snow, was sitting on a small bench at the door, her cheeks slightly raised and a bit flushed, looking at the clouds in the sky, not knowing what she was thinking about, and she seemed slightly lost in thought. 3 wine bottles were placed on the ground, one of which was opened, and 2 small bowls were placed in front of them. The raindrops dripping down from the eaves, highlighting the slightly cold face, making people feel like they have returned to the time when they first met. Su Buling walked to the eaves holding an oil paper umbrella and looked back and forth. Where did Manzi go? Ning Qingyi came back to her senses, turned her head and looked up, then continued to look at the sky. Manzi is waiting for you to drink. It's been a long time since we had a drink. We had a bowl first, and she immediately lay down. Su Buling put away the oil paper umbrella and leaned against the wall, and peeked into the door. The cabin was very clean before leaving, but there were no thieves. The bedding had been taken out and spread on the small bed. Xiao Manzi, who was wearing a warm red dress, was lying on it, with the quilt covering her upper body. Her face was red and she was obviously a little drunk. Maybe she heard the noise and sobered up a little. She half squinted her eyes and smiled drunkenly. Next, Mr. Su, he. Then there was silence again. This girl. Su Buling couldn't laugh or cry, shook his head, turned around and sat down next to Ning Qingyi, and dragged the small bench a little closer, so that they were close together. I just met an acquaintance at Sun's shop. When we went to Renai Hall before, it was the first time we met Chu Chu. We had our fortunes told on Hutai Street beforehand. Do you still remember? Ning Qingyi had been thinking about this, and she suddenly realized when she heard these words, I also met her just now. I thought she looked familiar but couldn't remember. It turned out to be that little girl, her name seems to be Xiao Dehua. Su Buring nodded, picked up the remaining half of the pot of Duan Yushao, raised his head and took a sip. Yes, when I approached her to plan my marriage, she said that the person she wanted to marry was right in front of me. Thinking about it now, it's like a god to predict things. Ning Qingyi's expression suddenly condensed, and then she became cold again, looking away. Don't be so sentimental, who wants to marry you? Su Buling picked up the wine bowl, poured a bowl and handed it to Ning Qingyi. We agreed to be a couple first. People in the world are hard to keep track of once they make a promise, so don't go back on your word. Ning Qingyi looked down at the wine bowl, took it and took a sip, then licked her red and thin lips. Humph. Su Buring chuckled lightly, thinking of Xiao Dehua, and sighed. Last time we went to Renai Hall, among the groups of killers we met, there was a man who used an iron gun. He was Xiao Dehua's father. When Ning Qingyi heard this, her eyes moved slightly. Born in the world of martial arts since childhood, I have seen many entanglements of love and hate. I understand that in such grievances, the ones who get hurt are always the children who are mentally immature. She sat up a little straighter. I think the little girl is doing well now. Is she okay? It's good. I found a more powerful master. Her master is very skilled in martial arts. He is probably good both internally and externally. He feels more oppressive than Zhu De Jiansheng. I just don't know where he is. Xiao Dehua has probably been there in the past 2 years. Practice martial arts and see if Zhengu is stronger than Nightingale. In a few years, I'm afraid you'll be able to hear her name in the world. Ning Qingyi frowned slightly. Everyone in the world knew what he wanted to do when his close relatives died violently and he became a disciple. She thought about it. In Renai Hall, they were the ones who plotted evil against you first. We were just protecting ourselves. Furthermore, those 2 people were very skilled in martial arts at the time. They killed themselves and we didn't stop them. If the wolf guards hadn't come over, we wouldn't have stopped them, had already escaped, and was finally killed by the wolf guard. Logically speaking, it has nothing to do with us. It doesn't matter in the first place. Shui is in the business of killing people. He deserves it. He will kill him if he encounters him again. But the child is innocent. Without his father at a young age, everything will change in the future. But this kind of thing there is no way to avoid it. It can only be said that fate plays a trick on people. Ning Qingyi was silent for a moment, maybe thinking of her own life experience, and snorted lightly. Why can't it be avoided? I already have my wife and children. If I were content with what I had and didn't seek wealth and high-ranking officials, but lived an honest life, how could anything happen? Su Buling shook his head and gently held Ning Qingyi's hand. Nothing can go as planned in your lifetime. In hindsight, you definitely shouldn't have done those things, but you wouldn't have known that beforehand. For example, Li Hanzhong, as a scholar, those who excel in learning will become an official. Han Chuang studied hard for several years in order to serve the imperial court. This has been the case for scholars throughout the ages. It is not wrong for him to want to go to Beijing to seek an official position. According to the opinions of scholars, upright, relying on learning and writing to stand up to the heaven and earth, can be compared with the Jianghu people who use force to rebel against the ban. Furthermore, your mother was framed and became a fugitive. As a scholar, Li Hanzhong must have wanted to redress his grievances to the court, instead of hiding in the mountains to admit the crime. If Songji hadn't come to power later to clean up the world, he would have returned home in glory. Maybe. Ning Qingyi was silent for a moment and snorted softly. The matter has come to this, so what if there are thousands of reasons? He is still thinking about the imperial hegemony and working as a lackey for King Wu, but he has no intention of repenting at all. Su Buling just tried to persuade her casually. Seeing that Ning Qingyi was in a bad mood and knowing that talking more would be useless, he stopped talking and asked instead, would you like to go in and take a rest? Ning Qingyi drank 2 bowls of Duan Yu Shao, and there were 2 blushes on her cheeks. She was reminded of past thoughts, and her mood was a little low. She was indeed a little drunk. She nodded after hearing this, and stood up to enter the house. But before Ning Qingyi got up, she discovered that Su Buring reached out and put his hand through her skirt to hug her legs. He dragged her back with his right hand, and then she was hugged horizontally with a slight movement of her body. Ning Qingyi's thoughts suddenly returned. What are you doing? Sending you to rest. Su Buling's expression was calm. He walked into the house and closed the door with his feet. I remember the first time we met, that's how I carried you over. You tied me up, and I had to rush to save you. But it exhausted me. Ning Qingyi didn't listen to these interruptions at all. She twisted her body and tried to land on the ground, her eyes slightly cold. Do you think I don't know what you are thinking? If you want to take advantage, just say so and don't make excuses around the bush. Su Buling blinked, placed Ning Qingyi next to Manzi, and said seriously. Qingyi, I want to take advantage of you. Ning Qingyi was stunned for a moment, but she didn't expect Su Buling to speak up. Her face became even redder and she wanted to get up and go out. No, you have a beautiful idea, please let me go. Su Buling grabbed Ning Qingyi's wrists with one hand and pressed them on the quilt, showing a slight dissatisfaction. Look, I'm going to tell you that you won't agree, so you still have to find an excuse. You were injured on your back last time, let me see how you are doing and whether there are any scars. As he spoke, Su Buling raised his hand and opened the skirt of his clothes, revealing his white lotus belly band. Ning Qingyi obviously lost her balance, her eyes were anxious and angry, she turned her head to look at Manzi next to her, and twisted twice. Su Buletin you, ah. The lotus flower was pinched, causing Ning Qingyi to tremble violently. Qing Shui's eyes were filled with shame and annoyance. Let go, I'll just let you kiss me, Manzi is here. Su Buletin was satisfied, isn't that right? This is like a couple, close your eyes. Ning Qingyi's face was as frosty as snow, but she couldn't hide the blush on her cheeks. She gritted her teeth and glared at Su Buling before reluctantly closing her eyes. Woo! Rustling. The house is small, the bed is not big, and the old wooden boards make a slight noise. Zhu Manzi lay on the inside, drank a bowl of duanyushao, and fell asleep. Drowsily, she noticed someone moving around next to her. She hummed slightly dissatisfied and opened her eyes. Before I even thought about raising my eyes, I saw the Iron Sister Ning Qingyi and her lover hugging each other and chewing each other. The big white ball was so pinched that it changed its shape. I'm crazy. Zhu Manzi suddenly woke up, his face suddenly turned red, but was immediately replaced by anger, and he stood up suddenly, almost crying. Xiaoning, shut up. Stealing my man in front of me, you are going too far. Ning Qingyi was completely being bullied. She had just entered a state of mind and found that Manzi was awake. She woke up immediately. In embarrassment, she pushed Su Buling away from her body and hurriedly sat up. Close the skirt. Manzi, it's him, he used force on me. Zhu Manzi almost burst into tears, grabbing Ning Qingyi's shoulders and shaking her. I won't listen, I won't listen. No wonder you got me drunk. It turned out that you wanted to kiss Mr. Su, and you did it in front of me. Ning Qingyi remained motionless, frowning and said, Manzi, don't slander me. Why do you mean I got you drunk? You drank it yourself and turned it over, or did I help you into the house? We are sisters who want to be the boss. You know I'm here, but you still. Chatter. Su Buling finished his meal, tidied his clothes a little, and said softly. Okay, let's talk about it back on the ship. We have something else to do in the afternoon. Ning Qingyi was very thin-skinned. If she was caught holding hands, she would be embarrassed for several days, let alone now. At a loss, he didn't dare to confront Manzi, so he quickly got up and ran out. Zhu Manzi stood up and put on his shoes, wanting to continue to trouble Ning Qingyi. When Su Buling passed by, he pursed his lips and said aggrievedly. Mr. Su, how could you do this? I'm obviously here too. The big eyes clearly smell like vinegar. Su Buletin took a few sips of the full face and smiled. Is it fair now? What's fair? Zhu Manzi was satisfied and hurriedly got out of his arms and chased out of the room. Xiaoning, stop and speak clearly, otherwise I will break up our relationship with you. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 647. Pegasus returned from Chang'an City to the dock of King Gui Tower. It was already afternoon. The light rain stopped. The spring breeze lifted the clouds and revealed the sun, shining on the spring-filled countryside. Ning Qingyi was riding in front on a white horse chasing the wind. The slight drunkenness had long since dissipated, but the blush on her face had not subsided. She drove the horse at a trot with a sullen head, hoping to get rid of the followers behind her. However, Zhu Manzi was also riding a wind-chasing horse, and his speed was not slow at all. He followed behind and talked all the way. "Xiaoning, I know you like Mr. Su, but if you like him, you have to be reasonable in your behavior, right? I obviously met Mr. Su first, much earlier than you. It doesn't matter if you don't treat me as your sister. There are some things that you have to avoid. How about a moment? You'd better make out with Mr. Su in front of me while I'm drunk. Do you know what it feels like? I want to imitate Chu Chu and play Feng Chiu Huang outside." Ning Qingyi's scalp went numb when she heard that, and she retorted. "You can't play a tune. Hey, is this about the song? If I flirt with Mr. Su in front of you, will you feel better?" I didn't mean it. I told you it was because of force." "What's the use of force? Do you think I didn't see you hooking Mr. Su's neck? The little cherries are standing up." Tap tap tap. Ning Qingyi galloped on his horse and ran directly onto the boat, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Zhu Manzi was offended by his good sister. How could he just swallow his anger, chase him into the house, and continue to reason with Ning Qingyi? Su Buling had been following behind to watch the show, and the sisters were quarreling with each other. Naturally, he would not run to start a fight and explain. As soon as the three of them got on the boat, Xiao Qi came to the deck and looked back at the two little girls. "Ms. Sir, what happened to them?" After getting married, Xiao Qi's hair was styled into a woman's bun, and she added a few more jewelry. Although she still wore a long black dress, she had a more feminine temperament than the domineering female CEO before. Having been busy with business for the past month and a half, Xiao Qi's face was obviously a bit haggard. She concealed it very well, but she couldn't deceive Su Buling's eyes. Su Buletinling felt a little distressed. He walked up to her and tugged the hair beside Xiao Qi's ears. "It's nothing, just joking. Don't think about business all day long. Play around with Xiang'er and Hongluan and relax. Good for physical and mental health. Don't wear out your body before the battle begins." There were a lot of people on the deck. Xiao Qi raised her hand to suppress Su Buling's intimate gestures and said softly, "I'm used to it. Besides, there's nothing to fight with Xiang'er. As long as I'm not busy with business, she'll be a mess." The idea came to me. Today I will shave my tail and tomorrow, I will use my sister as my training partner. Su Buling was quite sympathetic. "Really? Come on, I'll accompany you to clean up Xiang'er and let you vent your anger." Xiao Qi looked at the sky and gave Su Buling a slightly angry look. "It's broad daylight. Kui Zioan lives in Xiang'er's house. How to deal with her? Let's talk about it at night. By the way, Kui Zioan seems to have been waiting for you all day. Listen to Xiang'er if you want to take her to visit her own grave, don't let anyone catch you." Su Buling supported Xiao Qi and walked back to the shipbuilding. "I have asked Lao Yu to keep an eye on the surrounding area so that no one will see him. I will take Miss Kui there, and you can wash your hands and wait in the house." I know. Xiao Qi's face turned red, and she was a little greedy at the few words. She slightly bumped Su Buling with her shoulder, and walked upstairs. A moment later, along the dock, Su Buling stood under the boat and waited quietly. The spring sun slanted slightly, dragging a tall shadow on the ground. The wind-chasing horse was minding its own business, gnawing on the young grass blades with water droplets on the roadside. On the deck boat, two dogs were squatting on both sides of the pedals, wagging their tails. Kui Zioan, wearing a Jingchai skirt, walked down from the deck accompanied by Xiao Xiang. She was carrying a bamboo basket with incense in her hand, paper money, and a curtain hat on his head to hide his too eye-catching appearance. "Mother, I'm leaving." "Go ahead." Xiao Xiang stood on the edge of the deck, holding the big white goose's neck with her left hand, and her right hand on her waist. Her eyes stayed on her daughter-in-law who was slowly getting off the boat, her expression slightly complicated. Xiao Xiang understands Kui Zion's temperament and likes to be clean to the point of being a bit stubborn. Things that others have touched will be carefully wiped with a handkerchief before use. Only people who are very close and trustful will not pay attention to this. By some mistake last night, Su Buletinling touched Kui Zion, and touched that spot. Xiao Xiang thought that after Zion found out, she would take a dozen baths just like her sister was licked for the first time. But in the end, Kui Zion didn't show any displeasure. She didn't care about being taken advantage of, which shows that in her heart, Kui Zion treats Su Buling as more than just a close person, maybe. The more Xiao Xiang thought about it, the more awkward she felt, especially when Kui Zion always called her mother, and some random thoughts always appeared in her mind, such as "Mother, my husband is so powerful," and the like, which made me nervous just thinking about it. Tingling. But Zion and she were in the same boat, and she couldn't push Zion down when she got to the shore. It was wrong to make connections and obstruct her, so Xiao Xiang could only watch helplessly. Su Buling knew what Bao Bao was thinking, and waved at the shore with sincere eyes, proving that he had not made a mistake. Unfortunately, Xiao Xiang didn't pay attention at all, and walked towards the shipbuilding with the big white goose in her hands. The big white goose flapped its wings and struggled, and she even said a lesson in a deep voice. "If you act recklessly again, do you believe I will pluck your hair and make it into a writing brush?" Goose feathers can only be used to make goose quills, but ordinary brushes obviously cannot be made. Su Buling felt a chill somewhere on his body and coughed unnaturally. Kui Zion held the small basket, glanced back, and said crisply, "The Queen Mother doesn't seem very happy. What's going on?" Su Buling didn't have a hard time explaining it, so he just smiled and said, "The big white goose is too fierce, and it may have offended Xiang. Let's go. It's quite fierce." Kui Zion didn't pay attention anymore, walked slowly to the side of Chai Feng horse, handed the basket to Su Buling, then held the saddle with both hands, stepped on the stirrups, and got on the horse. The horse chasing the wind is very big, its shoulders are half a head higher than Kui Zion's head. It has no stool and no martial arts skills, so it is not easy to climb up. Kui Zion spent a lot of energy before she sat sideways on the saddle, put her skirt back a little, looked at Su Buling, and showed a little hesitation. "Would you like to find another horse? It's a bit crowded for two people." Su Buling didn't bother to hug the beauty, he raised his hand to hold the reins and walked out. "The Queen's mausoleum is not far from here, just over 3 miles. If you don't know how to ride a horse, just sit down." "Good." Kui Zion smiled softly, sat upright on the horse and looked towards the countryside outside Chang'an City. It was sunny after the rain, and the roadside was lined with red flowers, green willows, and shady trees. The scenery was very nice, but at this time, the two of them were obviously not paying attention to the scenery. Su Buling led the horse and walked slowly. Although it was an unintentional mistake yesterday, when he was alone with Kui Zion, it was difficult to be as innocent as before. His mind was full of soft, and he was a little ashamed to say it in his heart, feeling that it was blasphemous. A little white flower, she wanted to apologize, but she was worried that Kui Zion would find it difficult to accept it. Kui Zion is also thinking about this matter, but she has been different from ordinary women since she was a child. She doesn't care about unintentional mistakes at all. She just felt that Su Buling was a little taciturn today and was not as interesting as before. The two of them walked for a while on the road where grass grows and warblers fly. Kui Zion suddenly said, Hey, are you thinking about what happened last night? Su Buletinling's expression froze. He quickly calmed down his messy thoughts, tilted his head and smiled. Yes, I accidentally broke into the house last night and disturbed the girl. Kui Zioan had a clear mind and knew the source of the trace of embarrassment on Su Buling's face. She smiled and said seriously. I don't blame you. You don't need to take it to heart. You and the Queen Mother are husband and wife. As the saying goes, a little separation is better than a new marriage. It's normal to rush to find her when you come back. But what I can't figure out is that even if you admit the wrong person, treat me as your other wife. According to etiquette, you should let me go out and see your mother again. Why do you pinch me? There was a bit of astonishment in Su Buling's eyes. He didn't dare to turn around and look directly into Kui Zioan's eyes. He just smiled dryly and said, you know it was me who pinched you. Kui Zioan's expression was calm and there was nothing strange about it. You have big hands, so I can tell. I know you didn't mean it, so I don't blame you, and don't think about it, otherwise you won't be considered a gentleman. Well. Su Buling blushed. As long as the girl doesn't mind, actually, I'm not much of a gentleman. Kui Zioan shook her head. You are a gentleman if you are upright and upright. It is normal for men to be lustful. You don't have to blame yourself for this. Su Buling spread his hands. Why should I blame myself? What is there to blame myself for? Kui Zioan still shook her head. It's not okay to be lustful and confident. You have to treat this as a normal thing, just like eating and drinking, so that you can have a clear conscience. Lustful, just like eating and drinking. There is no need for emotional pornography. Su Buling was silent for a long time, knowing that Kui Zioan was talking about food and sex, but the words didn't sound right, so he finally gave up the debate and said instead. Forget it, let me tell you poetry and stories. Whatever you want to hear. Spring. Well, there is spring water in the south and north of the house, but I see a flock of gulls coming every day. The flower path has never been swept by visitors, and the canopy door is now open for you. Under the setting spring sun, the two of them were walking further and further apart on the official road. 2 updates of 6,000 words. The current writing quality is not high. I still have to leave a few chapters for storage. Today is the second update. Guys, please give a thumbs up to the Queen Mother. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 648. The spring sun is setting in the west, and the breeze is gentle. On the trail in the eastern suburbs of Chang'an, a white-robed young man led a black horse and strolled among the flowers. A delicate woman in a Jingchai cloth skirt sits sideways on a horse, wearing a curtain hat and 2 embroidered shoes dangling in the air. The mausoleum of Empress Kui was built among the mountains and fields of red flowers and willows. After Songji succeeded to the throne, he was frugal and allowed Empress Kui to fake her death. The mausoleum was not large and there was a small peach forest planted around it. The terrain was remote and no one came here on weekdays. Excuse me, people only come to clean up the weeds and trees during the holidays. In the grove outside the Queen's mausoleum, there is a small tomb, which is just a small round earth bag, with an unmarked monument standing in front of it. The dead man had no name, surname, or relatives. Eunuchia buried him there, and no one came to visit him again. The grave was already overgrown with weeds, and it was almost impossible to find this small grave without getting closer. Kui Zioan dismounted in the woods and looked at the small grave. There was not much emotion in her eyes. She just seriously lit 3 sticks of incense in front of the tombstone, squatted in front of the wordless monument and burned paper money, and then whispered softly. In your next life, you will be reincarnated into a good family. Don't be a dead soldier anymore. Also, don't be so upright in your work, and live for yourself. Su Buling leaned against the big tree and waited quietly, feeling calm in his heart. Although Jia Yi died at his hands, in that case, it was like the black piece eating the white piece on the chessboard. There was no hatred between the chess pieces, they just followed the path paved by the chess players. Eunuch Jia was Jia Yi's adoptive father. He did not help Jia Yi seek revenge after the incident, but helped Jia Yi complete his mission as a dead soldier. It was also for this reason. Soon, the paper money burned into ashes in the spring breeze. Kui Zioan stood up and looked around. Maybe she felt that the surrounding vegetation was too messy. She ran to Chai Fengma and took Su Buling's saber. Weeding around the grave. Su Buling will not leave until tomorrow to return to the military camp, but he is not in a hurry and says, "Miss Kui, let me do it." Kui Zioan leaned over and arched her waist, the skirt on her hips was stretched round, she looked back and smiled. "Just rest. This is my business. I will do it myself." Su Buling didn't say much when he saw this, and went back to lean under the big tree, watching Kui Zioan's back swaying among the flowers and plants, her jade dumpling-like buttocks a bit eye-catching. He slightly turned his unintentional gaze, but there seemed to be nothing else to see in this barren place, so I unconsciously took a few more glances. Inside the imperial city, there is the imperial study. After the tedious political discussions were completed, the courtiers exited the imperial study room, leaving only Kui Huelu and Guan Hongzhou standing quietly in front of the desk. Song Ji, who was wearing a dragon robe, held 3 sticks of incense in his hand, lit them on the candle, and inserted them into the incense altar on the desk. He raised his eyes to look at the scroll hanging on the desk with deep eyes. A bit nostalgic. In the portrait, the woman is looking back in the forest, and only her back can be seen. As Eunuch Jia said, Kui Zioan was a mirror to Song Ji. She had a clear mind and was not contaminated by any sourness in the market and the court. She was also the only person who could chat with Song Ji on an equal footing. After sending Kui Zioan away, Song Ji became completely alone. He didn't feel lonely before, but at this moment, before the avalanche-like situation, the pressure of the entire dayo was on one person's shoulders. In the leisure time after the busy work, even Song come, why don't you want to find an outsider to vent your bitterness? It's a pity that Kui Zioan is the only one in the world who can listen to the complaints that emperors cannot say, and only Kui Zioan dares to scold him as the emperor. The portrait is very charming, but in the end it is just a dead object. It cannot be used as a mirror, nor can it listen to the noisy words accumulated in the heart. Song Ji stopped and stared for a moment, then calmed down. When he turned around, he had returned to his Gujing Wubo appearance. He sat down behind the desk and looked at the 2 confidants in front of him. Kui Huelu, the imperial censor, was Kui Zioan's biological father. Due to this in-law relationship, he had a much closer relationship with Song Ji than other court officials. Taiwei Guan Hongzhou was promoted by Song Ji. Among the 3 princes, Prime Minister Xiao Zhuang, even though he deliberately avoided his relationship with Prince Su, has become an in-law. It is difficult for Song Ji to trust Xiao Zhuang anymore. The only ones who can discuss countermeasures in private are the 2 court officials in front of him. Pillar. Guan Hongzhou waited for the ministers to leave before he said, "Su Buling came here with the Ziliang army." Although there was nothing unusual in the court today, he accepted it happily even if he was given a false position. But the Ziliang army is almost a private soldier of the Su family. The soldiers and horses only recognize King Su's tiger talisman, but not the emperor's seal. If he insists on seizing power but refuses to obey orders and disobeys orders, Hongyi seems to be helpless. Guan Hongyi is Guan Hongzhuo's younger brother, and was entrusted with important responsibilities by Song Ji. As an elder brother, he was obviously afraid that his younger brother would not be able to suppress the son of the vassal king, and something would go wrong when the time came, so he had to take precautions first. In this regard, Kui Huelu shook his head. Is it the king's land in the whole world, and is it the king's ministers who are on the shore of the land? The military power of the Su family was given by the Holy Emperor. It is true that the soldiers only recognize the generals, but the generals have to recognize the emperor's seal. Su Bulletin: if Ling Ruo acts arbitrarily and refuses to obey Guan Hongyi's orders, he can just remove him from his post. The reason why Ziliang is only allowed to send 50,000 troops is because the imperial court lacks these 50,000 troops, but it does not mean that he cannot survive without them. Room. Guan Hongzhou thought for a moment and became a little worried. If this offends King Su will also turn against him. Songji gently raised his hand. I am not greedy for this throne, but none of the four kings in the east can be of great use. King Su turned against me, and I had no choice but to abdicate the throne in favor of someone worthy. The world will still be named Song, but King Su may not have allowed it, thinking that I rely on him. The self-respect of the troops and their disobedience to orders proves that they are rebellious, and I will not compromise against them in the slightest. Even if the four eastern kings attack Chang'an and kill my lineage, it is better than the Su family entering the pass and holding the emperor hostage to order the princes to kill. Absolutely the entire Song family. Just let Guan Hongyi use his troops freely. If he can force him to rebel, it will be nothing more than a dead end, and the four kings of the east will clean up the mess. But remember not to give Su Buling a chance to accumulate military prestige in counter-rebellion. Once his prestige exceeds that of Guan Hongyi and wins the military morale of the counter-rebellion army, he will really be in trouble. When Guan Hongzhou heard these heart-wrenching words, he felt reassured and nodded seriously. Don't worry, Your Majesty. Hongyi has been leading troops for many years, and his prestige in the army is not inferior to that of Guo Xianzhong. As long as His Majesty allows him to let go without any scruples, he will be able to fight the battle well without giving Su Buling the chance to lead an army to respect himself. Kong Renfang, Detective Department. Countless wolf guards were walking through the yamen, either coming back to take orders or going out on orders. Although the detective department does not belong to the military system, as the intelligence agency under the emperor, it is still very busy when it is fully operational during wartime. Behind the yamen, under the plan library, is the dungeon where felons are imprisoned. Zhang Kai, the right prince of the northern Qi dynasty, was holding the iron railing with both hands and talking nonsense. Sister, you are all famous seniors in the world. You can't kill innocent people indiscriminately, right? Although I am the heir apparent of northern Qi, I have always loved the people like a son and kept myself clean. According to the people in the world, I should be a good official. Now I am imprisoned here. You don't have to draw your sword to help when there is injustice, you must have some good food and drink. Outside the iron railing, the Dowager Zhezhi Empress in palace attire was sipping tea at the table. Next to him were the masters of the secret guards and Song Ying, who was pacing back and forth in the dungeon. The Nine Festival Empress might have been tired of hearing this, and said slightly dissatisfied. Young people, my husband should stand upright before and after his death. It doesn't matter if you don't go on a hunger strike to show your resolve, how can you be more rude than a woman like me? Zhang Kai went from being the heir to the throne to becoming a prisoner. After being imprisoned for several months, he had already had enough. Although Empress Zhezhi was older than him, as the late emperor's concubine, her appearance was definitely not bad. Her eyes were scanning her charming figure. I don't want to eat anything. It's not like I can't go out. If you look at it, northern Qi will almost cross the Yellow River. It will take at least a year or two to reach Chang'an City. Otherwise, you can just follow me from now on. Wait until northern Qi regains its kingdom. It is indispensable for you, sister, how about I let you be the princess? The Zhezhi Empress frowned slightly. Your father Zhang Hong is already in his 50s, yet he still has the nerve to speak. Do you think your father is Su Wang Suyu? If he is as infatuated and handsome as Suyu, I will give him a good beating. If he doesn't fight back, I might even consider remarrying. Your father has more than 30 concubines. No, when I become my princess, I am only in my 20s. Although I am not allowed to make that bastard fierce, my beauty is not half worse than him. Bah, shameless. John Kai knew that it was impossible to convince these Song family eagle dogs, but he was locked in a dark dungeon with nothing to do except make love, and he was ready to continue to get close to the Nine Festival Empress. But before he finished speaking a few words, a loud bang suddenly came from above the case library. Boom. The dungeon, which was only lit by torches, was filled with rubble and debris. The dome of the cell above John Kai was directly smashed through by a huge stone lion, and two figures fell down at the same time. Zhou Qingkaiu, with bare hands and only a robe, raised his hand to grab John Kai's shoulder and flew out of the hole. The only military leader in the northern Qi dynasty, worshipped the moon sword fairy Yan Huilin, held a sword in one hand, and fired the sparks of calcium carbide. Several swords came out at once, and before many secret guards could see clearly, they knocked the two of them over the railing. Song Ying's expression suddenly changed as she was pacing. She drew her sword and rushed towards the cell. Yan Huilin held the Qingfeng sword and stood behind the iron railing. He glanced at the divine arrow Yang Quan in the opposite cell. He felt that there was no way to save him, so he also flew out of the cave. The nine-section empress drank tea, and her martial arts skills were naturally not as good as those of the top masters in the family. She was frightened when she heard the noise. She turned around and saw that there was only one stone lion left in the noisy cell just now, half of which was missing. The figure was immediately stunned. Song Ying came to the cell door and split the chains with a knife. It's Zhou Qingkaiu and Yan Huilin. Chase. Promise. Many secret guards chased them out in an instant. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 649. The sun sets in the west. Outside the Queen's Mausoleum on the eastern outskirts of Chang'an City, the area near the small tomb has been tidied up. However, Kui Zioan's obsessive-compulsive disorder is a bit severe and she cannot tolerate any flaws in her eyes. She is still pruning the branches and leaves on the surrounding trees without stopping. It means to come down. Su Buling sat under the big tree, holding a wine gourd in his hand, enjoying the flowers, grass, and beauties with his wine, and telling some interesting stories by the way. Ning Keichan asked Xiao Qian, "Why are you here?" Xiao Qian said, "I'm here to sleep with you." When Ning Keichan heard this, he thought, "You are a girl, but you came directly and said you wanted to sleep with me." Then he said, "Get out of here, or I'll call someone else." Kui Zioan listened very carefully and realized that Su Buling was a bit teasing, so she said softly, "Don't laugh at others. That Ning Keichan is a scholar. It's right to sit back and relax. If it were you, you would definitely say, 'Is there such a good thing,' right?" Su Buling blinked and had nothing to say. Kui Zioan listened to the story and carefully cleaned the vine branches and leaves on the trees. When she got to one place, she suddenly saw a big black ball hanging under the branches and leaves. Kui Zioan paused and took a closer look, feeling like a hornet's nest. After living in the mountains for many years, she had naturally seen a hornet's nest, but according to her understanding, wasps would move and build new nests in the spring. This hornet's nest looked like it was a nest built last year, and it should be empty inside. Thinking of this, Kui Zioan raised her hand and struck the hornet's nest with a knife, causing the large hornet's nest to fall to the ground. Puff! Su Buling spit out a mouthful of wine. His eyes were horrified. He jumped up and ran towards Kui Zioan. With a hint of a smile on her face, Kui Zioan said crisply, "It's okay, it's empty. Look." Buzz buzz. In the spring woods, the sound of densely packed wings can be heard. Kui Zioan's smile froze slightly. She threw away the knife and squatted on the ground, holding her head. "I'll go." Su Buletinling's eyes were full of astonishment, and he was a little curious about how this white and tiger little village girl lived to be so old. He strode forward, drew out his drunken bamboo sword, and struck out a dozen times in a row, cutting the wasp in two. It's just that wild bees are flying from all directions, and no matter how fast the knife is, it can't guard Kuizioan next to him. After Su Buling slashed a few times, he suddenly picked up Kuizioan, who was squatting on the ground holding his head, put it on his shoulders, jumped on the horse's back and ran away. Kuizioan whimpered softly and lay on Su Buling's broad shoulders. Her slender waist was stable enough not to fall off. She raised her eyes and looked at the wasp chasing behind her, with some doubts in her eyes. "Why are there wasps? You don't have to run, just squat on the ground and load the wood. They can't see it." Snap. Su Buring really didn't know what to say, so he lightly slapped the buttocks on the side of his face with the blade of the knife. "Okay, cover your face and don't look disfigured." Kuizioan frowned slightly, feeling a little hurt. "Why did you hit me?" She raised her hand and hit Su Buling on the back as a retaliation. She looked angry, but she followed the advice. "Cover your face with your sleeves to avoid being stung by a crazy wasp." Tap tap tap. A black horse was galloping in the countryside, followed by a black cloud. The man was holding a girl on his shoulders. The wind was so strong that he lifted up his skirt to cover his face. He quickly pushed the skirt down with his hands and hugged the girl's legs. On the other side, in the countryside outside Chang'an City, dozens of cavalry secret guards were chasing after him frantically, followed by countless wolf guards who were outflanking them. At the foot of the emperor, at the headquarters of the wolf guard, prisoners of war were kidnapped. If the emperor found out, he would be furious. Song Ying was so anxious that he drove his horses in pursuit. However, the Northern Qi Imperial Master and the sword immortal Yan Huilin were absolutely ordinary people. Although the detective division had snooped out some information and guarded them tightly, they did not expect that these two behemoths would dare to go deep into the tiger's den. The preparations were not sufficient at all. After Zhou Qingkai broke out of the detective division, it completely disappeared into the sea and disappeared. Song Ying led the secret guard to search aimlessly in the countryside. Suddenly, a warning came from the falcon in the sky. Song Ying was overjoyed. After chasing him for only half a mile, he heard the sound of galloping horse hooves. Everyone looked up and saw a black wind-chasing horse galloping past in the very distance in the fields full of spring. On the horse was a man in white robe with a face like a crown of jade. He was galloping with a knife in one hand. His body was facing many people. It was too familiar to the secret guard. Prince Su. When many of the secret guards saw Su Buring, their eyes were a little dazed. They were even slightly stunned when they saw that Su Buring was carrying a girl on his shoulders. Su Buletinling is trying to rob a common woman? It seems to be running away, it really looks like. No wonder I was spotted by an eagle. Doubt surged in the mind of the secret guard, and he guessed various possibilities in an instant, but at this time, he could not care so much. Song Ying quickly spoke loudly. "Prince Su, have you ever seen a thief escape from here?" In the distance, Su Buling rushed out of the field and was shocked when he suddenly found a dense group of old acquaintances from the secret guards. What he was carrying on his shoulders was the current empress. If this was discovered, Song Ji would probably cut him into pieces. Kuizioan lay on Su Buling's shoulder. When she heard the voice, she glanced secretly from the corner of her eye. Unexpectedly, she saw the Jia Empress in the cavalry. Her face paled slightly and she whispered. "What happened? It's Aju, she is very familiar with me. Hide well." When Su Buling heard this, he was even more shocked. He held Kuizioan in his arms with his backhand, pressed his head on his chest, turned around and fled elsewhere. Many secret guards who were chasing after them found that Su Buling had turned around and ran away. Their eyes froze for a moment, and they secretly said, Prince Su must have robbed the daughter of the common people for fear of being discovered. Seeing Su Buling's reaction, Song Ying also felt that something was wrong, and quickly drove her horse to catch up. Su Shizi, why are you running? Su Buling knew that his behavior was a bit suspicious, but what could he do? You can never stop to say hello to the secret guard. He hugged Kui Zioan and cursed angrily without even looking back. Are you blind? Didn't you see that I was being chased? Chase. The secret guards were all confused. After looking carefully, they discovered that this famous military leader and son of the vassal king was followed by a swarm of giant wasps behind him. Song Ying's eyes were filled with astonishment, and she opened her mouth to curse, "Are you a humming military commander afraid of wasps?" But he obviously didn't dare to say this, so he could only say anxiously, "The crown prince has seen any thieves escaping from here." Zhou Qingkaiu, the imperial master of the northern Qi dynasty, kidnapped the crown prince Zhang Kai. Su Buling was slightly stunned when he heard this, and suddenly realized who Xiao Dehua's master was. But this had something to do with him. He hugged Kui Zioan and kept saying, "I didn't see it, driving." The horse chasing the wind galloped, and in the blink of an eye there was only a black spot left. Song Ying herself was engaged in investigation and intelligence work. When she saw this reaction, she knew something was fishy. She changed from carrying to holding, deliberately covering the woman's appearance. The problem must have appeared in that woman, either she was snatched or stolen. Identity cannot be seen in the light. It's just that Zhang Kai was kidnapped. The matter was too big. Song Ying couldn't think about it at this time. Seeing that Su Buling ran away without looking back, she had no choice but to lead many secret guard masters to continue searching for Zhou Qingkaiu's whereabouts. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 650. Tap tap tap. The spring breeze is so proud that the horse's hooves are so fast that I can see all the flowers in Chang'an in one day. Su Buling rode his horse, whipped his whip, held the beauty in his arms, and ran through the official road around Qinggui Tower. Kui Zioan was sitting in Su Buling's arms, her cheek was pressed against her chest, the horse's hooves were running around, and the tip of her nose was red. Perhaps because she couldn't bear it any longer, Kui Zioan tried her best to turn her cheek and glanced upward. "Hey, did you get rid of them? You almost covered me to death." The wasp had given up the pursuit, and the secret guard had long since disappeared. Su Buletinling's expression was serious and he glanced back. "I've gotten rid of him, but there are many people outside and there are wolf guards everywhere outside the city. If you bear with me a little longer, I'll be on the ship soon." Kui Zioan blinked her eyes, turned her cheek, buried it on Su Buling's chest again, sniffed and smelled, and then said, "You smell so good, the smell of Osman thus, it seems to be the smell of Lu Hongluan. Where did you go to sleep with Lu Hongluan last night?" Su Buring nodded, "I don't have my own bedroom, so I just went there. I heard from my mother that she is your aunt. Aren't you feeling weird?" Su Buletinling's expression looked slightly awkward. We're not my biological aunt. You are still my aunt, and Xiang'er is still my aunt." When Kui Zioan heard this, she turned her cheek again and glanced upward. "You clearly know that I am your aunt. We are acting urgently to avoid being discovered. You should be innocent and calm. Why is your heart beating so fast?" Su Buling's eyes were serious. "You went to stir up a hornet's nest and bumped into the secret guard again. If I were calm and not nervous at all, wouldn't I be a piece of wood?" Kui Zioan thought about it and felt that it made sense. "You are lying, but the reason is sufficient, so I won't care." Su Buling loosened his hand on Kui Zioan's back slightly, and focused on riding without looking away. After a busy day, it was already dark when we returned to the boat. Su Buling led the horse to the boat, and Kui Zioan followed behind. His expression was not strange at all, and it was no different from when he went out. I don't know if he really didn't take these things to heart. The two of them entered the boat building just after dinner. In the boat building, Manzi and Qingyi stayed in the room to eat dinner, still arguing quietly about things in the small courtyard. In the dining room, Xiaoqi, Xiang'er, Hongluan, and Yufu were sitting at the round table eating. They were all dressed up carefully. They were clean and still with a bit of moisture, and their clothes were changed into light and transparent spring skirts. Sitting on a small round stool, her slender waist outlines her graceful curves. Looking from the side, each one looks attractive. The three eldest sisters had obviously discussed it, and when they saw Su Buling coming back, they ignored him and just blinked, with a hint of "Mister, you understand." Song Yufu had not been together yet, and was ordered to clean up her innocence. She thought that the elder sisters were going to give her husband to her, so she was a little embarrassed, so she whispered, "My husband is back." Su Buling glanced at the door, and his blood suddenly surged. Knowing that his wives were deliberately coveting him, he really couldn't control himself, and nodded slightly. "Eat well and don't get up. I'll take care of you later." Kui Zioan walked in front and was a little confused when he heard this. "What are you doing to deal with them? It's not good for a man to hit a woman. You just hit me, and I didn't tell you to come." It was hard for Su Buletinling to explain, so he and Kui Zioan returned to the room and put down their belongings. Kui Zioan was busy outside all afternoon and was a little hungry. She washed her hands first and then took out the small wooden bowl Su Buring had carved by herself from her cabinet. But when she glanced at the cabinet, she suddenly remembered something. He raised his hand to take two things, turned around, picked up the round rabbit tail and shook it with a smile. "By the way, my mother gave it to me. Does it look good?" Su Buletinling staggered and looked at the fine texture of the rabbit tail with complicated eyes. Why did she give you this?" Kui Zioan noticed that Su Buling's expression was similar to Xiao Xiang'er's, both were hesitant to speak and slightly embarrassed. She asked curiously. "My mother said it was put in a flower pot, but I don't think so. Do you know where it was put?" "I don't know, Sai." Su Buling rubbed his forehead, feeling a little embarrassed by Kui Zioan's clear eyes. He raised his hand to take the rabbit tail, put it back in the cabinet, and said with a smile, "I'll tell you later. Anyway, I didn't insert it into the flower pot. I guess you won't be happy if you find out." Kui Zioan shook her head. "I won't be happy if you are so appetizing. I think this thing is very beautiful. If it is inserted where it should be inserted, it should look better. If you and the Queen Mother don't tell me where to insert it, I can figure it out for myself, but I can't figure it out. If you can figure it out, something will happen." Su Buletinling felt like he was splashing ink on a pure white flower. He was too embarrassed to continue the topic and did not answer. Upon seeing this, Kui Zioan stopped asking, took out the small mahogany sign, took out the small carving knife from the side, and carefully carved a one on it. Su Buling was really confused when he saw this familiar scene that he had seen more than 100 times. "I went to the woods with Kui Zioan for a few hours. When I came out, Kui Zioan carved the word on the redwood sign. If Master Bao Bao saw this, he would not be strangled to death." He quickly stepped forward and raised his hand. "Miss Kui, you, don't carve randomly, otherwise the baby will kill me if he sees it." Kui Zioan paused, holding the small mahogany sign, slightly confused. "Why?" Su Buling just wanted to push the baby on the couch and give him a good spanking. He said helplessly, "This thing, is very meaningful. It should be used to record special things." Kui Zioan nodded. "Yes, my mother said the same thing. I think today is quite interesting and it scared me, so I wrote it down." "No. Forget it, let's talk about it later. I'm hungry after running around all day. Let's go eat." Su Buling took the mahogany sign again, put it in the cabinet, and urged Xiaowen to leave. Xiaowen had no choice but to follow him out of the room. She didn't like crowded places. She usually ate alone on the terrace with a bowl in her hands. But today Su Buring came back. Su Buring must have eaten with his wife, so she also sat down with Xiao Xiang'er. Next to Lu Hongluan, Xiao Qi and Xiaowen were not familiar with each other, and they couldn't figure out their thoughts, so they all had strange thoughts. Xiao Xiang'er has adapted to it, and naturally helps Xiao Wan with the rice, asking like an elder. Xiaowen, did you encounter anything when you went out today? Xiaowen sat at the round table and did not show any discomfort due to the crowd. She smiled and said, I encountered it. When I was sweeping the grave, I poked a wasp nest. I thought there were no wasps, but a large swarm came out. Then Su Buling put me on his shoulders and ran away, as if he was robbing a civilian girl. Xiao Qi narrowed her eyes and glanced at Su Buling suspiciously. Lu Hongluan was well aware of her baby bump and smiled, not surprised at all. Xiao Xiang'er was a little annoyed and glared at Su Buling. Su Buletinling, what's wrong with you? Su Buling was picking up vegetables for Yufu. Facing the baby's scrutiny, he said calmly. The situation is urgent and there are hundreds of wasps. I am not a god, so I carried Miss Kui and ran away. There is no other meaning. Xiaowen also nodded, yes, obey the authority in urgent matters. If I didn't obey, he even spanked me. Su Buletinling's expression froze. No. Eat, eat. While chatting about the common things, after finishing the meal, it was already dark in a blink of an eye. On the terrace behind the ship, Xiaowen was rocking on a lounge chair, staring at the moonlight in the sky in a daze. After eating, Xiao Qi said she had something to discuss with Xiao Xiang'er in detail, and called Xiao Xiang'er to the room upstairs. Then Lu Hongluan and Song Yufu disappeared, and so did Su Buling. Xiaowen was not stupid and could guess what she was doing. Although she felt it was a bit inappropriate, she didn't take it to heart at all. After all, it was someone else's family matter and had nothing to do with her. After looking at the moon for a moment, Xiaowen suddenly thought of business again, took out the small wooden sign, and by the moonlight, seriously carved a 1 on it. The Queen Mother said that she should record meaningful things, and she felt that interesting things should be recorded. Planting flowers and watching them bloom and fade is because she likes to be ordinary. Looking back on the past 20 years, there were many accidents that broke the ordinary life, but the only accidents that she didn't hate seemed to be the chance encounter in the woodshed and today's hornet's nest. An accident that can break the dullness without making her annoying is naturally interesting. How could she not write it down? Thank you to Mr. A Poisonous Book for the 20,000 reward. Thank you to Mr. Guarding a Field for the 10,000 reward. Thank you Swaya Kinky for the 10,000 reward. The bosses would like to compare their feelings with the Queen Mother's baby.